Hi, this is Brian from hostlefork.com, and I am going to do a little short video of a very small thing, something I made in one night as an answer to a design question that was posted on the User Experience StackExchange. And the goal was to create an interface so that people could make non-overlapping numeric bands, and then for the ranges within those bands be able to come back with a mapped to value. And so a good example of that would be, for instance, grade scores, where 95 to 100 is an A. And I'll show you my take, and then I'll break down a little bit about what the other approaches were and what I think this one shows. And to me, I said the natural place to start, an edge case for that, is the negative infinity to infinity case. And so that's where you start out with that, whatever the thing is you want to return for any input. So this is the anything. And the interface doesn't have a lot of buttons. I said I wanted to have an input box where you just specified split points. So 10, 20, 30. You see now we have blanks for each thing in those ranges. So I could say, whatever, apple, banana, orange, pear, whatever. And the split points, you can tick this little arrow to say where the edge goes to. So here's an interface saying that from negative infinity to 10 is apple, and then from 10 to 20, but not for either the values 10 or 20 themselves, well, you get banana, and then 20 to 30 gets you orange, and above 30 to infinity gets you pear. I didn't want to put in buttons for deleting ranges and raise all these questions of, if I had something from 20 to 30, and what do? Do I push a button and split that so that it's 25 to 20 to 25 and 25 to 30, and then which slot would orange go into? And I didn't like any of that. So I thought, for instance, let's imagine that split point 30 is to go away. You would find over here that you got history with either an open, like a curvy bracket or parentheses, or a square bracket, in order to indicate the inclusivity of that range value. And then, interestingly enough, if any of those ranges ever were to come back, then you would find that history entry would be taken back. So let's do a little trick here for a moment. Let's say that 30 comes back. You see the history entry is just jumping back in to reoccupy the ranges. Probably a more complicated UI for dealing with that. But let's say, delete it again. Let's say that 25 showed up. So 25 showing up created a new range we've never seen before, 20 to 25 as well as 25 to infinity. So no history entries jumped in. But then if we brought back a 30 point, we're going to get the pear history entry to jump in, but not the orange. But also interesting is that if you just let's just refresh this out, clear all that. You can go in any order. It'll sort the numbers for you, so you could say 30, 70, negative 10. It's able to support fractions, so 0.207, negative 0.3. So you get some decimal numbers there. And it also just skip over garbage. If you just happen to have junk in there that it can't read, it won't deal with it. And you can at any time click the clean up button, and what that'll do is that'll actually turn the input into a sorted version of the list. So this is helpful if you find something like this kind of data and you want to copy that and then bring it over here and paste it in, and you notice here it's figured out that these are ranges, like that's 95 through 100, not 95 and negative 100. It would, if there was a space there, it would have brought in negative 100, but it assumes that if you're close like that, it's a range, or if you do space like that, it's a range, not a negative number. And you notice a little trick happened here. They didn't have a space in between the A minus and the 92. So we got a negative 92. We have to hit space to get that fixed up, and then guess we got another one down here with a D minus. So that gives us those ranges. So the machine intelligence here is obviously nothing to write home about. It really is just picking out numbers, and then you do stuff with the data, so it doesn't even grab out the letters here. But people are already looking into that. That's kind of stuff that you get when you're using something more sophisticated than just a text entry, and you have something that's got some structured data, something a little bit more Mathematica-y or Excel-y in the background. And I've seen a number of those things. But what I wanted to focus on was how this simple thing compared to something that I thought would probably take longer to write and certainly introduce a lot more edge cases. This is one of the early answers. And it's a form, and it skips a number of the kind of key questions of what needs to be dealt with in such a design, like it doesn't cover the boundary cases as to whether they're inclusive or exclusive, so that's not in there. What if you hit both of those X buttons so that it's and then you want to really collapse it down? You say, no, this is a case where I want the full range to just be the same thing no matter what the input is, which could be useful as an edge case if you're if you're designing a lot of these things. It's hard to know if you don't know the exact scenarios. What if you hit plus? I mean, you got 20 to 40 and 40 to 80, so your range is already covered. That plus has to claim the space from somewhere. Or does it turn it into 20 to 30 and then 30 to 40? Does it split it down the middle, or what? And another guy, he sat down and started working on something more complicated and trying to reason through all the kind of little edge possibilities and giving you all these little buttons. Now, I don't know if he did come up with a complete solution or not. I was kind of trying to follow it. But what I preferred was that idea of not making this interface look like a situation where every button is like a incarnation of an API call that a programmer might want to do to manage the low-level data structure that implements the data that they're dealing with. That these are very data structure driven as opposed to sort of user scenario driven. And that's where you start to lose empathy for the user who has the several numbers that are coming from a source that's textual. They're copying and pasting, or just want to work in sort of a text stream of just being able to type a straight line of those numbers. And I think companies like Google or Wolfram Alpha going at that problem by trying to get as much as you can intelligence out of just a text box. And so this demo hopefully showed a little bit of that. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the code. There's not going to be all that much to say about it. But I did pretty much do this in one evening, and then I came back to it to touch it up once just because I was relaunching my website and I wanted the live demo to be coming straight off GitHub. So I made a couple of changes to help with that so that I could just get pull and update it if I ever wanted to update the live demo. And I came back again today just to look at it because there was that problem when I was demoing it with the 10-20 coming back as not a number, and wanting to fix that. And I am MIT licensed it just for convenience of anybody who wants to rip code out. It does define a interval class to represent a mathematical interval that can be including a bound or not on each end. So there's a interval bound that takes care of some of that. And interval, they've got a few error messages here for throwing errors when you have something like trying to do an inclusive infinity. So this could be reusable. If anyone searches for mathematical interval JavaScript, maybe it will help them see what to do or what not to do. And nothing too fancy. The conversion to go to strings follows. There's actually International Standards Organization spec. I didn't know this, but for a lot of things, including numeric bounds. So you can talk about the brackets in the parentheses as being a standard. So that's an interesting point to make. And it's not a jQuery plugin. I'll just say that. It uses jQuery and nothing else, which makes it good for somebody who might have other dependencies or want to adapt it. It would be easy. It's pretty clear to read. I wanted to mention a little bit about my coding philosophy changing over time, just stick something in on that in terms of looking at something like this. And of course, usually if I'm ever doing something in JavaScript, I'm kicking and screaming. I would rather be using Rebel or Red or something, or a tool that is not based on text at all. And so the thoughts that I had coming back over it increasingly for anything, especially that you're just going to show as a little demo on the web, with GitHub, it's nice to use just spaces in your code, not tabs. I used to believe in tabs because they were somehow more purposeful and meaningful than spaces, but they're actually they don't add that much meaning in terms of purpose and intent unless you really want to distinguish between the spaces and the tabs. And so as long as you're working in this sort of melange of text, I think that having things that are invisible and unpredictable as to how wide they're going to be really subtracts value from your code in sharing it online and having people look at it. And also fitting things in 80 columns. I came from a heritage of not believing any of this is important. You should be using a tool that's able to do proper wrapping of expressions and laying it all out for you. And I still believe that. But I will say that there's some interesting, just like working in someone could go to a comic and say, oh, the comic book, why are the comic strips only 3 wide? And, it could be infinite if we only don't consider the limitations of paper. And of course, there are all kinds of good reasons for certain comics to go on for longer than 3 frames. But I think that when you study the limits of working within a constraint in a medium, it can bring you to different kinds of thoughts. Something I wouldn't have believed was true a long time ago, I would have thought, but it's just bad. So, and things like, I've changed my opinion on whether or not you should always put like a single line if statement using curly braces as just a matter of course, for security. It's safer that way, and also it means that changes to the code don't come in. You aren't arguing over it, especially when you have to switch from single to multi-line. Every time you do the switch, you're touching more lines of source code. So it's this kind of strange thing. But in terms of laying down a printed artifact, like as if you're working with an old-time printing press, I think that you really do want to work with the eye and stuff. But yeah, it's all pretty readable, pretty simple. So maybe someone will someday who has a similar problem find that interesting. And I guess that's all I'm going to say about the code, really, other than my usual. I think this is a really awkward way to write software that I hope doesn't last too long. I hope that Ajax web stuff is it's one of these evolutionary accidents that gets used to transmit ideas. Like, see how I could transmit this idea? I could make it in one night and get it over the web. And so some rapid exchange for now, but I hope we get some actual real technology coming down the pipe. Thank you for watching.